Free and fair elections, I'm in favor of. Free speech, freedom of press, it's what I do. I'm in favor of that. So can I advocate for that? Yes. I also think that when it's used against you in an anti-Semitic way, that's what bothers many people is they're like, anybody that says that we are failure and the war's a failure, that's absurd.
Martin Lamont Hill.
Yeah, as someone who's been covering Israel-Palestine for 2 decades and as a professor of Middle Eastern studies, I'm fascinated by the discourse. And I mean, I love Ben. Ben's a dear friend, and I forgot he was an athlete until I watched the way he's turned himself into a pretzel to say everything from Zelensky to anti-Semitism, everything but Israel's doing it wrong.
In today's video, Mark Lamont Hill fact-checks Ben Ferguson on Piers Morgan and Censored as they go head-to-head over AIPAC's influence, U.S. support for Israel, and the growing debate surrounding Middle East policy. As Ben Ferguson attempts to defend the pro-Israel narrative, Mark Lamont Hill responds with facts that completely tear apart his argument. So, let's jump in and watch how Mark Lamont Hill completely shuts down Ben Ferguson on Piers Morgan and Censored.
2/3 of the country now have a negative view of Israel. And I think it's entirely down to the actions of Netanyahu and his government, driven and fueled and manipulated by some of the most psychotic right-wing headbangers I think any government has ever had. In Ben-Gvir, Smodrich, these guys, they just seem to be competing to say and do the more and more outrageous things. And I think that the combined effect of that is making Israel increasingly unpopular. And for people like me that like Israel and know a lot of Israelis and care about the country, I find it's an incredibly sad thing to watch. How does this...
Look, I think there's a couple of things here. One, some of the anti-Semitism that we're seeing in this country is because there are outside forces that are pushing it very hard. We can debate that later, but it's very well documented.
I don't dispute that for a moment. I think there are genuine anti-Semites out there who hate Jewish people.
And a lot of funding and a lot of money and a lot of time on social media. But let's move past that for a second. There are certain principles that I will always defend. One of those, and you can look at Ukraine, for example. Suspending elections for years on end, I'm against that, right? I don't care who's in charge. I understand if there's an intense war for a time period where you can't have an election for safety, but the idea that Zelensky has done what he's done and not had these elections is absurd.
Well, there is an intense war. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? There is literally... There is literally an intense war. He's had to declare martial law because millions and millions of voters have had to leave the country. Millions more are fighting.
Let me go back. There is an intense war. Let me go back to what I'm saying. Zelensky can hold on to power indefinitely as long as he's in a war that's intense and you're justified in not having an election.
But he's literally in an intense war because Russia keeps bombarding his country.
But hold on. Let me hear my point out here. I'm going to say that I advocate for people to have an election. There are ways that they can do an election. There are ways they can do mail-in ballots. There are ways that you can have the people have a say. The same way I'm saying that, I'll go back to Israel. I love Israel. I stand with Israel. I do think there can be flaws, and you can say that. One of the examples is if you're limiting free speech, I will always be an advocate for free speech. And I think as a friend, we need to remind them that free speech is incredibly important and freedom of the press is incredibly important. You can have that conversation without it be just trying to hit a scoreboard against Netanyahu, right? I think you're going to see a major change in Israel.
Well, if he wants to promote free speech, why doesn't he let the media into Gaza?
I go back to the point that I just made. I'm in favor of free speech.
Yeah, he's
you can
not.
Advocate for that with your
he's
friends.
Not in
I understand.
Favor of free
That's why
speech.
I'm advocating for it right now.
Yeah,
the same way that I'm advocating for there to be elections when there's a guy that's holding on to power like Zelensky is another example. There's certain principles I will always be in favor of. Free and fair elections, I'm in favor of. Free speech, freedom of press, it's what I do. I'm in favor of that. So can I advocate for that? Yes.
This really highlights the difference between supporting a country and supporting the decisions of its government. Those aren't the same thing, and democracies work best when policies can be questioned without being mistaken for hostility toward an entire nation or its people. Healthy debate is part of what keeps democratic institutions accountable. Another important point is press freedom.
This really shows the difference between supporting a country and supporting the actions of its government. Those are two very different things, and democracies work best when people can question government policies without being accused of attacking an entire country or its citizens. Open debate is one of the key reasons democratic systems stay accountable. Another major issue is the freedom of the press. Independent journalism has always been essential during times of conflict because it gives the public a way to verify the claims made by every side. When reporters are prevented from entering conflict zones, it becomes much more difficult to independently evaluate humanitarian conditions and military operations. That lack of openness often creates even more doubt, confusion, and misinformation. It's also important to understand the difference between criticizing a government's policies and being anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism is hatred or discrimination against Jewish people, and it should always be condemned. But many legal experts, human rights organizations, and even Israeli citizens have openly criticized certain government policies while making it clear that their concerns are about those policies, not Jewish people as a whole. Keeping that distinction clear is necessary for an honest and fair discussion. History has also shown that public opinion can shift quickly during long conflicts. Images of civilians suffering, humanitarian concerns, and growing international pressure often influence how people see a conflict, no matter where they stood in the beginning. That is why governments usually face increasing scrutiny as wars continue. At the end of the day, standing up for democratic values means defending accountability, transparency, and freedom of the press, even during the most difficult times. Those principles make democracies stronger, not weaker, and they help ensure that governments remain responsible for the decisions they make during times of conflict.
I also think that when it's used against you in an anti-Semitic way, that's what bothers many people is they're like, anybody
All right,
that says that we are
All right, Mark
failure
Lamont Hill.
and the war's a failure, that's absurd.
Mark Lamont Hill.
Yeah, as someone who's been covering Israel-Palestine for 2 decades and as a professor of Middle Eastern studies, I'm fascinated by the discourse. And I mean, I love Ben. Ben's a dear friend, and I forgot he was an athlete until I watched the way he's turned himself into a pretzel to say everything from Zelensky to anti-Semitism, everything but Israel's doing it wrong. I think the way we're framing this is a bit curious. To say that Israel is this democratic place that has a kind of departure momentarily because of Netanyahu, I think is to misrepresent Israel as a state itself, which is not a state of all of its citizens, which itself is an apartheid state definitionally anti-democratic. So what we're seeing from Netanyahu is the Israeli state project on steroids. Netanyahu is not an exception to Israel. He's just the worst iteration that we've seen of it. And we do ourselves a disservice by pretending that Netanyahu is some alien that came down from another planet. And none of that is anti-Semitic. There's lots of anti-Semitism in the world, and there's lots of anti-Semitism in the public discourse. But the criticism of Netanyahu defying the Supreme Court, as has been previously stated, is not a new one, and it's not even one made from the outside. In September of right before October 7th of 2023, we saw the exact same thing as has been stated. We saw marches by the Israeli left, by Israeli liberals, people who are Zionists, people who defend Israel's right to rule over Palestinians. They still are like, you know what? But Netanyahu's a dick. And so there's a very organized, structured resistance to Netanyahu's disrespect of the Supreme Court, disrespect of free speech. But again, the disrespect of free speech in Israel does not begin and end with Netanyahu. You can't fly a Palestinian flag in Jerusalem right now, or 5 years ago, or 15 years ago, and I don't care who the prime minister was, you couldn't do it. Palestinians have never had the right to march with free speech. If we talk about refuseniks, if we talk about Jewish leftists, many of them have also been silenced in Israel. So none of this is new. So let's not pretend that it is. And the reason why the world is paying attention right now is not because Netanyahu cross some third rail. It's because we're paying more attention now. We have social media. We have more people speaking out. People saw the ugly deaths. People got to lay their eyes on the genocide. I've been working in media again, finally, for a very long time. And when we saw the bodies after Operation Cast Lead, when we saw the bodies after Operation Protective Edge, we were able to stand up as a community and say, you know what? What the Democrats have been telling us is wrong. What the Republicans have been telling us is wrong. There's a problem here. And honestly, I wish people were as outraged about Trump intervening in Israeli diplomacy as they are with him intervening in a soccer game.
Mark, October 7th, have you been to the kibbutzes and sat with the families?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
You've been to the kibbutzes and sat with the families and heard what happened to them and how their children were burned alive. You've been there.
I've answered your question. Yes, I've been to Israel.
Did you go to where
30 times.
The concert was and meet with the people who watched their friends be gunned down right before their eyes and die in their arms or trying to save their life?
I didn't go to where the concert was.
Okay.
To that specific
Have you been
thing,
to the
though. I didn't go
kids?
to that
Have you been
specific
to the
spot.
kids? And I'm grabbing this because this is important to see. I met with every family of every
None of this has
kid.
to do with
I don't
what we're
know.
talking
I don't know
about.
why. Hold on. I met with every family of every child that was killed on that soccer field, and this is what they gave me. The idea that you act like that day didn't happen and that somehow Israel's the aggressor.
What did I say?
When these are
I didn't say.
children.
Well, hold on.
Well,
I didn't say. Hold on. Hold on. You're misrepresenting. You're misrepresenting. You misrepresented what I said.
This is exactly why it's so important to separate criticism of government policies from criticism of an entire country or its people. In any democracy, governments should be open to public scrutiny, especially during times of war. Holding leaders accountable for the choices they make is not the same as denying a country's right to exist or ignoring the suffering of its people. It's also worth remembering that criticism of Israeli government policies doesn't only come from outside Israel. Over the years, thousands of Israelis, including former military leaders, legal experts, journalists, and human rights advocates, have openly questioned government decisions on issues ranging from judicial reforms to settlement expansion. That shows these debates are not simply being pushed by outsiders. They are part of an ongoing conversation within Israeli society itself. Another issue that deserves serious attention is the humanitarian impact of a prolonged conflict. International organizations have repeatedly warned that civilians, especially children, suffer the most during urban warfare. No matter who started the conflict, the laws of armed conflict require every effort to reduce civilian casualties and make sure humanitarian aid reaches those who need it most. These concerns are rooted in international law, not political partisanship. It's also possible to acknowledge the trauma caused by the October 7th attacks, while recognizing that Palestinian civilians have also endured tremendous suffering. Compassion doesn't have to be one-sided. Recognizing the pain of one group should never require overlooking the pain of another. And achieving lasting peace becomes far more difficult when only one side's suffering is recognized. In the end, meaningful conversations about this conflict should remain focused on accountability, human rights, and the protection of civilians. Those principles matter no matter which government is in power, and they remain essential if there is ever going to be a real path toward a lasting and peaceful resolution.
You can show all the children you want. I can show you thousands of Palestinian children.
Please. Let me ask Ben Ferguson.
That's not what I said. You're literally making things up.
Hang on, Mark. Ben Ferguson, let me ask you, have you met with any of the Gazan families of the 20,000 children who've been killed?
Yes, I have. Actually, I have. I met with them in D.C., not once, but twice.
Where?
Because I'm not afraid to meet with people and to hear what they're saying. But I go back to the point that the reason why I have this in my desk, when you're playing soccer and you just get killed and your kids get killed because of terrorists that are being supported by Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Palestinian state, and then you act as if somehow Israel invited this on themselves, and you say that they're committing genocide,
what did I say to suggest that, Ben?
Mark. It's a lie.
Ben,
it's a lie.
Ben, okay, let me respond. I literally said nothing about October 7th. I literally said nothing about who put anything onto anybody.
You act like it didn't happen. That's my point. You literally made my point, Mark. You act like it didn't happen. You act like Israel just goes in and bombs the Gaza Strip for no reason. It happened because of this and many other kids that were killed.
All right.
I don't think anyone. I'd like to respond to
Piers. I'd like to respond to that because that's unfair.
Everyone's talking too much. I don't think. Look, Ben, no one is claiming that Israel had no right to defend itself and had no justification in attacking Hamas. Of course they did. It's about the scale of what they did in response to what happened that has begun to horrify the rest of the world. It's the scale of the aggressive expansions in the West Bank. It's the scale of the massively over-the-top assault on southern Lebanon. It's the persuasion of the United States to join Israel in this crazy war in Iran, which has turned out to be a complete fiasco. It's all of that stuff.
And Piers, here's what I would say. There's a
not
cause,
Israel's original rights.
But that's not your point. To be clear, that's not my position.
Piers, there's a cause and effect.
To be clear, what you're saying is my position.
You feel like you're a country that is on a stopwatch. And I think Netanyahu clearly, there's a cause and effect. You do October the 7th. You feel like you're surrounded. You feel like people are coming after you 24/7. You feel like you're having and taking it from all sides. And you feel like you're on a stopwatch, and you have to go after the terrorists as fast as you can before you lose the opportunity. If the terrorists don't like and people don't like what happened, go back to October 7th and look at what's happened.
This really shows why recognizing the October 7th attacks and questioning how the war has been carried out afterward are not opposing positions. Most people agree that Israel had the right to respond after Hamas carried out a horrific terrorist attack. The real discussion is whether the military response has remained consistent with international humanitarian law and whether enough has been done to protect civilians. That distinction is important because armed conflicts are governed by legal principles such as proportionality and the protection of civilians. Even when a country is acting in self-defense, international law requires military operations to take every reasonable step to reduce civilian harm whenever possible. Those standards exist because wars often take place in heavily populated areas where innocent people are caught in the middle. Another reality is that humanitarian concerns have become an increasingly important part of the global conversation. International aid organizations and many allied governments have repeatedly raised concerns about the humanitarian impact of prolonged fighting, including mass displacement, shortages of food and medical supplies, and the devastating effect on children. Bringing up those concerns is not the same as defending terrorism. It simply recognizes that civilian lives deserve protection regardless of nationality. It's also worth remembering that criticism of the Israeli government's wartime decisions comes from a wide range of voices, including former Israeli security officials, journalists, and ordinary citizens who fully support Israel's right to exist but disagree with certain government policies. That shows these debates are far more complex than simply being pro-Israel or anti-Israel. At the end of the day, it is entirely possible to condemn Hamas for its attacks, while also calling for accountability when military actions affect civilians. Those two positions do not contradict each other. In fact, applying the same standards of human rights and international law to everyone is what gives those principles real credibility.